Hello, everyone, and welcome to VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by my co-host David Heaney in London, as we discuss the next steps in personal computing. We've got Henry Stockdale out there and Don Hopper looking at games for us, and you can tune back in on Thursday for our VR Games cast as we cover the latest ways to play in VR headsets. David, what do we have today?
Yeah, so we have two main sections of our show today. We're going to start by talking about some MetaQuest news. We'll talk about the revelation that Batman Arkham Shadow will have dynamic shadows on Quest 3. So they're really going to try and push Quest 3 there as a Quest 3 exclusive. We'll talk about Virtual Desktop getting support for multiple PC monitors. And maybe its developer, Guy Godin, may be in our comments, as he sometimes is. And then we'll talk about John Carmack revealing that he tried to kill Quest Pro before it launched because he correctly predicted that it would fail. We'll then go on to the second part of our show, which is about Apple Vision Pro. Unless you've been living under a virtual rock for the past few days, you'll probably know that Apple announced visionOS 2, and it's actually released the first beta of visionOS 2. And it also announced that Vision Pro will launch in 8 countries outside the US soon. And also, it announced professional tools for producing spatial videos and Apple Immersive Videos. So we'll see spatial videos that have actually been edited into proper stories, and we'll see Apple Immersive Videos from third parties instead of just from Apple. So 2 sections of our show, MetaQuest first, and then onto the Apple news afterwards.
Yeah, so people could plan ahead right there and, tune out when they want to, or lean forward in their seat if their headset, their future is coming up. I see Don is in our comments. A lot of regular subscribers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Want to encourage you to share the link out to other people you know, get new people into our show here and watching, because it's a good introduction show, I think, because we're going to cover a lot of basic sort of features that I don't know. I think it would be surprising to some people to realize these things are happening in VR these days, when you might not have gotten that picture anywhere else. So do encourage you to link out the link for this stream so you can get some questions in here and help everyone else out. Um, Also, I want to shout out to all the silent viewers out there. We've got a lot of people out there that I think quietly watch us sort of all across the divide in rooms, whether it's one person streaming in an office and a couple people gathered around commenting on it, or perhaps in VR in various spaces like big screen. And we do have Guy Godin out there, so creator of Virtual Desktop, tuning in for this. We always appreciate you tuning in and watching our show. And of course, we've got that subject coming up right now very soon where we'll be talking about it. So yes, thank you everyone for tuning in. And we will try to tear through it as quickly as we can today. David, why don't we get into this MetaQuest news?
Yeah, let's start with that first topic. And I just wanted to bring this one up because this is technically interesting. Now, this show, VR Download, we talk about industry trends and we talk about technology. This isn't really a game show, so we're not going to go super deep into this or talk about the gameplay here. We're just talking about the significance of this as a Quest 3 exclusive and how its developer Camouflage is approaching it. So Ian over the weekend posted some quotes from an interview on UploadVR.com with Camouflage about this Batman Arkham Shadow game. And here's a really interesting segment from it, or a few segments that I thought were interesting. So Camouflage's founder told UploadVR he asked someone to bring in an Xbox 360 to the office with a copy of Metal Gear Solid 5 and said, how are they doing that? That's an Xbox 360. Clearly, the Quest 3 is many times more powerful than this in reference to dynamic shadows. So they have said that a goal for this game, something that they are delivering according to them, is dynamic shadows. And that's something that you don't see in many Quest 2 apps, or if they are in Quest 2 apps, it's in a either faked way or in a very graphically simplistic game. And so not only are they doing dynamic shadows for other things you see in the world, but they're also doing a full body player model where you're not going to see floating hands. You're going to see the shadow of Batman throughout the game that is being done dynamically. And this is something where we are going to start seeing Quest 3 exclusives arrive in the second half of this year. Games that are built around the XR2 Gen 2 processor that leave behind the original. And we're going to see a push forward in graphics for standalone VR that we haven't seen since the transition from the original Quest to Quest 2. Right now, many games graphically are being held behind by Quest 2, and this is going to be the start of an era of well-funded games from proper studios that are taking advantage of Quest 3.
Yeah, David, speaking sort of to the parts of the interview that I sort of shaved out of that article. I didn't print that stuff yet. I just printed this little bit where they talked about the dynamic shadows in Batman, which is a big deal the way he described it. So we can't wait to go hands-on and really see with our own eyes how that feels. They talked about taking inspiration from Beat Saber and Super Hot. I will get into that on the Gamescast more with Don. Let's just move right on there to the next subject, because yeah, it is a big that we talked about it in that show that this is the beginning of a new phase of gaming for big funded standalone titles, and I don't think people are ready for that yet.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I would just say about this is that we do expect that Quest 3S, that cheaper headset, will also have the same exact processor and be able to run these games too. So it won't just be people who can only afford a $500 headset. There will be, very likely based on what we've seen, and go to uploadvr.com and search Quest 3S for our leaks and rumors roundup. Very likely from what we've seen, a $300 headset will be arriving in the coming months that will also be able to play this game with those dynamic shadows. But as you say, let's move on to talk about that virtual desktop news, because we have its developer, Guy Godin, in the comments here with us. And this has been an update that has been a long time coming. It's been one of the most requested features for virtual desktop, and it's great to finally see it arrive. And that is multiple monitors. So you may not even realize that Virtual Desktop's original purpose was not to be a PC VR streaming app for playing VR games from your PC on your standalone headset. Its original purpose was just to bring your monitors in 2D as 2D surface, well, your single monitor as a 2D surface. And so other apps like Horizon Workrooms and Immersed kind of leapfrogged Virtual Desktop in this regard over the past few years, with the ability to have triple monitors and have even virtual extra monitors. So you could turn your little 13-inch laptop into a triple monitor setup. And that's what Immersed really built its business around. Immersed being the company that's making Visor that we plan to see in September. And then it's also what Horizon Workrooms, Meta's first-party app, focused on. But Guy Godin is striking back now by bringing this feature to his app. And so interestingly, it will only support triple monitors on Quest 3. On most other headsets, it will only support 2 monitors at a time. And on the original Oculus Quest, it will not have multi-monitor support. It will only have 1 monitor. And Godin has told us that this is because he is doing this in a very high quality way with sRGB correct textures, using the sampling technique that was developed and pushed more accurately by John Carmack. So this is going to be, from what I've tried of it, it is the highest quality virtual monitor setup you will get on Quest. It definitely does have a higher quality than what you see in Immersed or Horizon Workrooms, but that means that only the XR2 Gen 2 that's in Quest can actually pull that off for 3 monitors at once.
Yeah, this is a highly sought after piece of functionality, and Guy Godin has been not uniquely, I guess big screen has also been there for a very long time in the same exact product category, but solo dev working on their own on this singular product of singular display. That was always been their thing. Like, it was, what was funny here, Guy, is as the timeline I recall, we're in here doing our show, and I think we even might have mentioned you or talked about you last week, and we did not see you in the comments. And instead of seeing you in our comments, you were sending us an email to tell us about this update, which was pretty amazing. Yeah, this is just an ongoing major series of updates, and I can't wait to see what's next. It was funny, I was just in Job Simulator on Apple Vision Pro, and it has a desk setup, right? The office job is very similar to the setup. And I remember having a conversation with you, Guy, on this show about how you would be thinking about a physics laden office setup, I would love to see that still from you if you're able to manage that at some point. But incredible work here, and I think it's time for us to get on to the next thing and look at some
Yeah,
comments.
you keep trying to skip across to the next topic. We do have a few more things to say about this topic. Firstly, that the other major feature it brings in is keyboard cutout. So this is very cleverly designed where it uses Quest's ability to track certain keyboards, and then within that tracked area gives you a pass-through cutout. So what you're seeing in the background here is a virtual office with a virtual monitor. But in this cutout, you see your real keyboard and your real hands. And the way that Virtual Desktop has pulled all this off is just very polished, very high quality. It feels great. And yeah, just as Guy Godin is leading the way in quality and stability for PC VR streaming, he now again is for traditional PC monitor streaming, which is great to see.
Yep, I am desperate. I miss it a lot on the Vision Pro. I want it, and I noticed in the comments here that Guy is saying we've got a cool environment coming soon. Think you'll like it, Ian. So I can't wait to see that environment. And as you've been so good about pointing out, David, on the Quest ecosystem and on the Vision Pro ecosystem, we see multiple attempts to try to bring your desktop into the space around you. You've even got Steam Link out there as one way of doing it. But Guy Godin, one of the leaders of this industry, in our comments, trying to push more features in real time with us. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for those updates.
Yeah, the only thing I've seen that's higher quality than this in terms of viewing a PC monitor in a headset is Apple's built-in Mac Virtual Display System. And we can't say how much of that is down to software versus hardware. We're obviously talking about something happening on a Quest 3 versus something happening on a Vision Pro. Apple is also able to pull off their end-to-end control of hardware and software by creating a direct connection between the headset and the Mac. So that's not really a fair comparison there. The last thing I just want to point out when it comes to this update is that those side monitors can actually be entirely virtual on Windows. This is a feature that already exists in Immersed and Horizon Workrooms, but just to be clear, Virtual Desktop has it too. So in real life, you have just a little 13-inch laptop in front of you, and you install the Virtual Desktop streamer, open Virtual Desktop on your Quest 3, and you now have a triple monitor setup, even though you only have one screen in real life. And that's great to see. That is really the power of this technology, that not only can you turn screens into software, but when you do that, you can have as many as you want. And as we've said before in our last week's episode, and we'll say in many, many future episodes, it is the trend that we're seeing that you can have whatever kind of productivity setup you want with just your headset wherever you want.
Guy Godin in our comments pointing out that Apple also does foveated encoding for their ultra-wide functionality. That was a new feature that we'll talk about
Yeah, we'll
soon.
talk about that later. Yeah.
And that's something third-party developers can't do because we don't know where the user is looking. So I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, on Vision Pro you don't, but something I was really interested to ask you, actually, Guy, now that we have you, I was going to ask you later when we talked about this, but I'll just ask you now. Could you do that on Quest? Because on Quest Pro, you do know where the user is looking. So could you theoretically implement the same thing on Quest Pro? Let us know in the comments if you can. And if there's nothing else to say on this, I think we can move to our next topic if you're ready.
Yeah, I wanted to get to this next topic because when it hit our internal conversation platform, I sort of laughed immediately. I think the moment everyone did saw this tweet out there from John Carmack, it's a pretty instantaneous reaction to hear him call this headset for what it is. So I'm seeing Geek coming here in the comments with a response, I think probably to your question, and it'll lead us in perfectly to this new subject.
Yeah, we'll just quickly read out that response. So he says, technically, yes, in response to using Quest Pro's eye tracking for foveated encoding, but there's no real benefit because the headset isn't real high resolution. That actually perfectly segments onto our next topic, which is about Carmack killing Quest, Carmack wanting to kill Quest Pro. And one of the big drawbacks of Quest Pro was indeed that it was pitched for a lot of the same virtual monitor use cases we've just discussed. A lot of the virtual monitor use cases is that Vision Pro really nails, except it did not have sufficient resolution. It was just underwhelming hardware. But let's just start by what Carmack actually said. So he said, I tried hard to kill the Pro completely. I had very high confidence that it would be a commercial failure and distract the teams for a year, preventing them from doing more valuable work on mass market products.
So I guess now is the time to ask this question or start thinking about it. Here he is being proven right. You wrote up an article extremely fast, but also with a lot of words in it, talking about just, giving credit where it's due in him calling out that this was going to be a failure in real time and how quickly it was. The thing I want to bring up is his comments about Horizon, about the Horizon OS shift and bringing on partners. We are on version, what is it, 66 of the Quest software, Quest system software. We had debates when you started, David, about what do we call this system software because they didn't have an official name. Well, the official name is now the Horizon OS. It's going to be the Horizon OS, and it's going to be it's going to be a new era that John Carmack specifically has said is going to be slower. That Meta is going to slow down what they can do. And I want to think about that in context as you start talking about Quest Pro here, because what happens if Meta has done so much so quickly? If we're on 66 versions of this Quest software that have just packed these headsets from Quest 1 to Quest 3 with just nonstop feature updates, right? I think I saw it in Quest marketing that it's the headset that keeps getting better, was what they called it for Quest 3. That's an accurate description over these last couple of years of just how much software improvement we've seen. What happens if Carmack is right again and Meta isn't able to pack in new features?
Yeah, Carmack is really big into this kind of opportunity cost analysis of looking at the software engineering realities of these major organizations and saying, if you want to do more, that means that it distracts you from your core goal, right? If you want to put engineering resources into X, then you can't do as much of Y. And that's something that people don't really think about a lot when they're saying, oh, I want Meta to do this, and I want Meta to do this, and I want Meta to do this. And so theoretically, they are this huge organization with thousands of engineers, tens of thousands of engineers. But in reality, when it comes to the practical size of a product team that works on, core software and works on strategy and product design, there are real limitations that kind of prevent you from just doing X, Y, and Z at the same time. And you're right to say that the criticism that Carmack brings up of Quest Pro, that it distracts from the core Quest line, are very much so similar to the criticisms he now brings up to the Horizon OS strategy, in that in all the effort that Meta is going to have to put in to make sure that Horizon OS and all of its features and functionality and its updates work not just for Quest 2, Pro, and 3, but then also for Asus and Lenovo and maybe LG one day and whatever other company decides to jump in. And that is a real reality. But I just want to start by addressing very quickly why we are pretty much sure the Carmack is right here, because I do see some people going, what do you mean Quest Pro didn't fail? So just if anyone does think that, like Quest Pro launched with Quest 3 having already leaked, right? Quest 3's specs leaked. So this thing launched at $1,500 when everyone essentially knew that Quest 3 was going to arrive a year later, only a year later, with a twice as powerful chipset. And that killed the value proposition right out of the gate. Then you have the fact that its pass-through was underwhelming, right? If you think Quest 3's pass-through is grainy, this thing was worse. It was really rudimentary pass-through. The resolution just wasn't good enough for virtual monitors, right? It was a very minor resolution bump over Quest 2. Technically on paper, it's less resolution, but this is dual monitors or dual screens, sorry. So you actually did get a higher resolution, but it still was nowhere near something like an Apple Vision Pro or even a big screen beyond. And it's lower resolution than this Quest 3 that arrived a year later for a third of its introduction price. It also didn't have room sensing. It didn't have the ability to 3D mesh your environment. They took out the depth projector a few months before launching this thing, crippling its mixed reality capabilities. So if you don't remember, just 4 months after this thing launched, 4 months, they cut the price from $1,500 to $1,000. Unprecedented. That alone should prove to anyone who's skeptical that this thing failed, right? You do not cut a $1,500 product down to $1,000 just 4 months after launching if it was a success. Then 9 months later, the information reported that Meta was no longer ordering new components for this thing, so production would end as soon as those components are gone. A year after Quest Pro launched, they were giving it away to Roblox creators, right? Like they were giving this thing away. They could have given them Quest 2s. They were giving it away. And the final nail in the coffin for Quest Pro is what we reported on last week, I believe, unless I'm mixing it up with the week before, which is where its flagship app, Horizon Workrooms, removed the whiteboard, which was designed around its controllers. These things had this little stylus tip you could put in the bottom. They killed off that feature. So few people own and use this headset, they didn't even want to keep its flagship feature. On the Steam hardware survey today, this thing is used by 27 times less people than Quest 3. And developers have told us at UploadVR that almost none of their users are using this headset. So Carmack was very clearly right that this thing was a commercial failure.
This comment from Not Suspicious that the charging dock was the best thing we got with the Quest Pro. Yeah, the charging dock was great unless you tried to use it with the facial interface that they stuffed in separately. That, you know, this thing was a test. I think I think Mark Zuckerberg was personally involved, right? I went and met him. This was our one chance to go and go face to face with Mark Zuckerberg, and it was at the Quest Pro launch, and he took personal responsibility for some of the decision making inside of this design. And now we're seeing him show up in photos and working with Andrew Bosworth, the CTO, personally on their glasses initiative. There's the real indications that he's personally involved with glasses development. But this was, like, why would you let him anywhere near your next products if this was the last one that launched?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that Zuckerberg apparently demanded of this was that open periphery, and that's what people do seem to like about it, right? So many times I hear people saying, yeah, so the pass-through wasn't good enough, the chipset wasn't good enough, et cetera, but I really like that open periphery, right? And there are people who get an aftermarket head strap for their Quest 3 today to do the same thing. The problem with this thing is, as far as I understand, it was a year delayed. It was supposed to originally come out in 2021, a year after Quest 2. But because of all the pandemic, supply chain disruption, and other kind of, chaos at Meta, it ended up coming out in 2022, just a year before Quest 3. It would be a very different proposition had this thing arrived 2 years before Quest 3 instead of 1 year. But at that point, they should have delayed it, right? This would be it's frustrating for a lot of people, and me included, I think, because this could have been such a great headset, right? If you'd give this thing Quest 3's chipset, or the new Plus version that was just announced that has support for the extra sensors, and Quest 3's pass-through at minimum, just Quest 3's chipset and Quest 3's pass-through, this becomes a completely different product. And because then you can also put in higher resolution displays, right? It doesn't even need to be 4K or 3.5K like Apple Vision Pro, even just 2.5K or 3K, right? Had this thing just gone a little further on specs, requiring it to be delayed by just 1 year or 18 months, it would have been great. This thing should have come out after Quest 3 as a higher end alternative, not before. And I think if you look at Meta's new strategy, where apparently the Quest Pro 2 for this year was cancelled in favor of this third-party strategy, I think they reacted too much to the idea without realizing that it was the implementation. And I wrote an editorial about this saying that the problem with this was not the idea. It's not a bad idea to have a high-end Quest. It's not a high-end Quest if it has Quest 2's chipset, barely any higher resolution, grainy pass-through, and no automatic sensing. If you want to make a high-end Quest, Meta, make a high-end Quest. But this was not actually high-end. It was, the sensors were high-end. You had extra features, right? You had that face tracking, that eye tracking. That's high-end. But everything else about it was just mediocre.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be time for us to move on here. You should probably look at the comments here in a section. I think the last note I'll leave this subject on is how many failures does Meta have in its budget? Right. If you look back historically, it was you can look at them as failures, or you can look at them as learnings towards what we arrived at. But this was what you look at the Quest. It already existed. It was already selling by the millions, and then they launched this, and it was not that, right. It was a misstep built on top of what should have been a success, and everything else that they've done was honing in on lower cost and greater power. With this next phase, we've got Quest 3 and I saw a couple of people asking about the XR2 Gen 2. We have every expectation that when they put in a cheaper headset with this XR2 Gen 2, it's going to kick off tens of millions of sales. So you're going to see a lot of headsets moved in a very small amount of time. And what I wonder about is what happens to this base layer of Meta's technology, right? This headset, Quest 2 and before it, all these early Quest devices use, they don't have all the latest APIs necessarily. You don't have the depth sensing technologies in all that earlier stuff. What does Meta do with the retirement and moving on from those things? You talked about giving away Quest Pros. You could give away a Quest 2 to there's millions of them. You could take those back, refurbish them, give them out to schools, and they would be an amazing dev kit for years to come.
Yeah, I think in a sense the deep discounts are already effectively that, right? They're selling this thing for $200. I don't think it's out of touch to say that for even most people, $200 is within reach, right? If you look at $200, that is a price point that most people, if they really want it, they can grab it. There are very, very few people for who a $200 product in the US, to be clear, is something out of their affordability range. If a school wants to grab one of these, that's the kind of thing that they could pull together, even if it's just getting parents to chip in. You just need 20 parents to jump in with $10 at that point, and you get something like this. Meta is actually launching a Quest for Education offering soon. That's something that I think schools will want to have before they jump in on the school specifically. But you're right to say it'll be very interesting to see. With Quest 1, they were able to move on from it quite quickly because they stopped selling it when Quest 2 was launched. It was more expensive than Quest 2, and Quest 2 vastly outsold it. But there are something like 20 million Quest 2 owners out there. So I think Quest 2 is going to last as a functional product that gets updates longer than you might imagine, right? There's no scenario in which Quest 3S comes out and they stop updating Quest 2. Quest 2 is going to stick around for a long time. It's just that the most cutting edge content is not going to support it.
And that's why I would love to see them retired into dev kits, recycle those devices into some kind of useful fashion. Like maybe they have less features than a fully featured device just because they can't do everything. Jack B's comment here that Zuck needs to have his crew create this generation's Oregon Trail for young students. I think that's a brilliant comment, and I think they just confirmed the next Civilization game coming for next year. I would that is a meeting that I would expect Mark Zuckerberg to have personally managed. Whoever is the property holder of Civilization, if they did not meet personally with Mark Zuckerberg, I don't know what Mark Zuckerberg is doing with his money.
Yeah, to be clear, you're saying that because Mark Zuckerberg is reportedly a big fan of Civilization, the series.
And it needs to be playable in VR. Yes, yeah. He's I think Bosworth himself sort of let leak that Zuckerberg plays the game and he quite enjoys that game. And when you think about these long timelines for games of that magnitude, right? They tried to hit it early with Grand Theft Auto, and then it never materialized. But it takes more than 2 to 3 years to get some of these titles into VR, and I could see that happening for something of that magnitude.
Yeah, I think when it comes to any of that school stuff, this idea of this Oregon Trail, again, that is all going to come in the Quest for Education offering. Currently, it's just not practical to use a Quest as a consumer device. You need to be able to remotely install and update and provision and manage users like that. And that's just something that is not possible right now. So we'll keep a really close eye on that Quest for Education announcement. They've announced the announcement, but they haven't actually announced it yet, which is a trend we've seen quite soon. So yeah, we expect it to come soon. A lot of people in the comments are saying that one of the things they loved about Quest Pro was the controllers. I will say I completely agree. The ability to have complete, mostly uninfringed, unless you're in a very dark location, controller tracking is incredible. The haptics that these introduced that are now mostly there in the Quest 3 controllers are great. These are pretty fantastic controllers, especially now with multimodal, where you can essentially, for custom apps at least, use this as arbitrary object trackers, right? You can use these for feet tracking if you want to use hand tracking. You can do hand tracking controllers at the same time. Some people seem to have not thought the tracking was good. Guy Godin has said tracking was just off on those controllers. I strongly disagree. I never had problems with that. I think the thing with all inside-out tracking, though, is it's completely environmentally dependent, right? There are some environments in which it's going to work really well and some environments in which it's just not.
Yeah, I think he was talking about like the wake up time on some of those controllers, but
Okay.
something that cracked me up is there's that pencil app. So there was an experimental app that won a hackathon that Meta held, and you take the Quest controller and place it on a piece of paper as a paperweight. And hypothetically, you could use those controllers for that paperweight, and then basically use that as a tracing paper because it's locking the paper location to the controller's position, and then you can trace exactly along those lines. But I love bringing that up, and I'm going to continue bringing that up because I'm so mad. I was asked why I don't get it repaired. I like having the defective devices around for historical purposes.
Yeah, I see now that what Geek Odin was referring to was that warm-up time. They actually did significantly improve it in software updates. We pointed it out in our review of Quest Pro, right? We said this is the only negative of those controllers is that you did have that synchronization time where their tracking space had to align with the headsets. That is dramatically improved in software updates. Today, it's a few seconds. Theoretically, with the next version of these controllers, they should put a few LEDs on, and then they can do like a very basic LED tracking. I guess even you don't need to do that at all, right? Actually, because with Quest 3, hand tracking is always running alongside controller tracking. So if they literally just swapped in the chipset of Quest 3, not that they will, but if they did, then that would be solved automatically because hand tracking would be there. The last thing I want to address before we move on is the reason that Carmack even brought this up at all. He was actually in a debate on X, formerly Twitter, about foveated rendering. And I'm bringing that up because I saw someone in our comments bring it up and say that in their opinion, Carmack was wrong about this, because Carmack's argument about Quest Pro was that if you take into account the energy, the watts it takes to sample and process the eye tracking sensors, you would actually get better performance by just using that same energy to overclock the GPU. That's what Carmack has said. So some people have misconstrued what Carmack said as saying foveated rendering has no benefits. That's not what he said. He said that for a headset of this resolution, right, sub 2K resolution, the benefit you get is less than if you just overclock the damn GPU in the first place, which is a fascinating way to look at this, right? Now that equation completely changes in two scenarios. One, where you're not energy limited. So on PlayStation VR 2, for example, you're drawing from mains power, as much energy as you want. The other scenario is when you have much higher resolution displays. That's when foveated rendering starts to become a benefit. On Quest Pro, you get a roughly 30% performance benefit from eye-tracked foveated rendering. But as Carmack said, if Meta unlocked the GPU frequency, theoretically by turning off eye tracking, you could actually go even higher than that, which is a very interesting way of looking at this. But once you get into higher resolution headsets like Apple Vision Pro, which uses foveated rendering almost all the time, it is fundamental. You can turn it off, but you will notice a dramatic reduction in visual quality. Foveated rendering starts to be essential. We haven't seen a Meta headset that actually has the resolution where foveated rendering would significantly matter yet. And that's what Carmack was pointing out.
Yeah, Sampler's asking, did someone try out Red Matter 2 with dynamic foveated rendering on the Quest Pro? I thought they did. That was the one game that tuned itself for Quest Pro.
It's the one major game that actually bothered to implement eye-tracked foveated rendering, not because they thought it was practical. Very, very few people ever actually used a Quest Pro in their user base, like most developers, and they found that exact same benefit, 30% or so. I've tried it. It works really well, but Carmack's argument still stands. If Meta allowed developers to overclock the GPU instead of using the eye tracking energy, they'd probably get 35% or 40%.
So what's interesting here is like I'm guessing that we still don't know what happened at the executive level, what those internal conversations were like, what, 2 years ago now or a year and a half, when they were making these decisions around the Quest Pro, right? You suddenly drop the depth sensor unexpectedly. And I remember there being comments from Carmack about the architecture astronaut. This comment suggesting that certain people like to, in these technical organizations, like to screw around and imagine what the perfect architecture would be for one platform to translate to another platform. He called it architecture astronaut. I was always wondering if he was like referring to Zuckerberg in a veiled way as his role in playing God to these teams that he effectively has as toys. He could command vast resources however he wants. And the best sourcing that I've heard is that he seems to have a surrounding group of people that help him garner the financial resources to put teams together to do whatever he wants. So whether it's, whatever pet project that team wants, they can all, we've seen it again and again. Meta shifts direction about every 6 months. There's new teams, new people in charge, new strategy forward. And it tells the story of Meta constantly shifting directions to the detriment of individual products and individual teams. And our comments and a lot of people give Carmack a lot of credit for pointing out all the slowness. But what I don't hear and what I don't understand out of Meta is who was, who is in a position to make Meta get there faster with fewer resources? Could we had could we've I've heard this suggested a few times that we could have had something like a Quest much sooner out of Meta if they had planned better, but they didn't, obviously. And there's going to be a question of whether Meta is going to have had the success that they intended to have because of that slowness in getting the product that they should have had all along.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just the inertia of big companies, right? One thing we saw Zuckerberg heavily focus on was this year of efficiency, where a lot of the layoffs, according to Zuckerberg, were about getting rid of layers. You always heard that meme of someone saying, that someone working at Meta saying, there are literally like 25 layers of management between me and Mark Zuckerberg, where all throughout that, every manager has their own vision, their own way of implementing things. Some of them are not as involved. Some of them don't even believe in VR. And then you get something where there is this executive vision set, but by the time it actually filters down to the ranks, it's not going to get implemented at any pace. Things are going to get cancelled and reshifted. And a lot of that changing in Meta, a lot of that shift of the company, a lot of those layoffs were about trying to flatten that structure so there are very few people between the top executives and there. But I think it's definitely right to say that there are significant strategy shifts. I think with Quest Pro, you can see from Mark Zuckerberg's interviews in the years before it launched that this eye tracking and face tracking was something he badly, badly wanted to get into products for the social aspect, right? For Horizon Workrooms, for, even Horizon Worlds, driving avatars with eye tracking and face tracking. That is the best part about this headset is that it brought eye tracking and face tracking to standalone, right? That ability, there are people today who love this headset for VR chat, for example, because they can just throw on a wireless headset and have eye tracking and face tracking in VR chat straight out of the box. Incredible, right? But I think that is in many ways the problem with this product, that it tried to do all these things on such an old processor and you can just see it strain. Like even its pass-through technique was just almost funny in retrospect, right? Where it was black and white pass through, where they then used a single color camera to colorize and like kind of paste it on to the point where if you were looking around or moving your hand, you could actually see the color chase the black and white part. And the reason for that ostensibly is that the chipset just couldn't support two color cameras at once, right? They just couldn't do it. You also see that so often with the performance. This thing would lag and slug along in a way that even Quest 2 wouldn't, because it's just trying to do so much with a chipset that simply wasn't designed for that. I think that is something you did see come from high, right? Mark Zuckerberg said, I want a headset out that does eye tracking and face tracking. We want to deliver on this vision of the social metaverse, and I want that in a product, and that's how you get to this thing. I think what we'll see, the big question to end off this segment, I'm sure you have more things to say, but to end it for me at least, is when will we see another Quest Pro, right? We essentially know from high quality reporting from The Verge that the 2024 Quest Pro 2 was canned. We know that Meta is partnering with Asus and Lenovo for third-party high-end headsets. We know from multiple reports, or at least it sounds like it from multiple reports, that LG was originally going to come out with a Quest Pro spiritual successor at the very least in 2025 next year, but that's now been pushed out to 2027. I think regardless of whether it comes from LG or Meta internally, because of the actual point of Quest Pro, this face tracking for the social metaverse, the next time we will see a Quest Pro is when Meta can deliver codec avatars on standalone in a standalone headset. And that will be the North Star and the primary marketing focus. Meta, the next time they come out with a Quest Pro 2, it will be, this is the headset that can scan your face into a photorealistic avatar and drive it in real time for Horizon Workrooms meetings that aren't powered by these primitive cartoon avatars, but look like you.
So I do have a couple thoughts there. Right, Meta launched a store. They launched a little sample store, and we wondered. I wonder where it's going. Right, I don't know what's happening next. And then Apple, of course, has had decades to build out systems for manufacturing on a global scale. They've had what hard-won lessons over the last 3 decades of the last 2 decades making iPhones, figuring out how do you send these devices into every country on Earth at every price point on Earth and still try to beat out an open source competitor, right? That the Android operating system coming against it. Apple has done what I heard out of Meta's executives is they said, we've played this playbook before when they referred to launching Threads against X. Apple has played its playbook before and won major races before. And these are the two companies battling head to head for the next step. This comment here from Jack B. Say what you will about Zuck. The guy actually does understand and closely follow the tech he is after. He actually gives a crap about it. Whether he's making good command decisions is the question. I think that's a very interesting comment. And it goes to my kind of point here is he aware enough of the needs of everyday people and their computing needs to kind of make good decisions at the very highest levels about how to handle everything? Or does everything Facebook does always go back to what's best for Facebook? So that's kind of where I'm thinking along those lines, and we'll come back to it. It's an ongoing question. I don't know when we get a Quest Pro 2, David. That's that my long-winded way of saying they've got a lot to do with store locations and in making partnerships with manufacturing before I think we get there to a Quest Pro 2.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that for the foreseeable future, Meta is back to its strategy of grow the market. Quest Pro didn't move the needle. It doesn't grow the market. It satisfied enthusiasts. It was actually a very out of character step in that sense that it was a headset for a very specific subset of enthusiasts that didn't go towards Meta's goal. And that's mainly what Carmack was saying in terms of why he wanted to kill it. He didn't think that, like, Meta wants to get this industry from 30 million people to 300 million people. That's their next step. They're saying, how do we get this to be a 100 million size market? And that's why the next step is going to be a cheaper headset, going the opposite direction. Quest 3S for something like $300 with color pass-through and the XR2 Gen 2 chip, not going up. When it comes to Zuckerberg's decision-making, I think the thing you can really say here is that the greatest insight and the greatest decision Mark Zuckerberg ever had was realizing back in 2014 what was coming in the next decade and the next 2 and 3 and 4 decades. And making the decision to buy Oculus for roughly $3 billion in 2014 was a stroke of genius, right? That was something that almost no other tech executive at the time would have ever done. That was considered crazy by many people. It got many people to say, wait, VR? Really? Okay, maybe it's a thing. If Facebook's buying it for $3 billion, there must be something there, but I don't think there's anything there. And every decision since then has been highly questionable.
I mean, I love that, and it's Facebook becoming a different company, right? The company was Facebook back then. Now it's called Meta. Carmack, through this transition, had praised the transition. He had pointed out, actually, things have changed dramatically on an interior level, to structure the company differently. But it's going to be, as we move forward, it's going to be hysterical to hear some of the ways Meta misspent money. At the same time that what you're saying is true, David, they went out there ahead in 2014 and spent this extraordinary amount of money on a very small number of people, right? The founders of Oculus. And then they had to figure out, how do we merge these ideas? How do we become a company that lives up to the idea that everyone is going to wear our personal computer on their face in the future? And it's still in transition. They're still figuring it out.
Yeah, I think that's what's unquestionable is that if Meta does get there, their spending will be seen as and is currently horrendously inefficient, right? They are not getting there through being a scrappy, lean operation. They are throwing tens of billions of dollars at this problem and kind of brute forcing their way there. But in fairness, Meta is also a company that before all of this was literally a social media app company. They were not a hardware company. They were not a platform company. They are coming at this back then and in the long term from 2014 from scratch, right? It's not like Apple where they had, Mac and iPhone and watch. And, when it comes to audio, they have the AirPods division. They've made all of these wearables and they've made these full-on computers, and this is kind of like a merging of what they've done before, and they have their existing platforms. It's not like Google that has Android or Microsoft that is Windows. Meta was coming at this from scratch, but the efficiency of spending is just clearly going to be horrendous. But it may not matter in the end, right? If they get there in the end, if this does in the 2030s start to become a profitable business, then it could be one of those gradually then suddenly effects where all at once this starts to make so much profit that they pay off all of that spending that happened, and it just becomes stories for history, and at that point it becomes a profitable division. It may not matter in the end.
Yep, beautiful. I so appreciate that. I think that's context you're unlikely to find on other podcasts. I do want to thank David for getting into that with me and our commenters for feeding into it. It's a wonderful discussion, pretty typical of what we've got on VR Download. Please like and share out the comment, share out this link to others. We're going to move into the second section here of our discussion as we talk about what, if you consider Quest Pro a real failure, I think it's, nothing makes it more clearly a failure than what Apple Vision Pro has turned out to be. David, why don't you break down what we're going to get into in this section here?
Yeah, so we're going to have 3 subsections of our Vision Pro discussion today. We'll just briefly discuss the fact that it's coming to other countries, right? It's only been in the US up until now, and very soon it's coming to other countries. We'll then talk about the fact that there's going to be professional tool chains, hardware and software, to make spatial videos and Apple Immersive videos. And we'll finish in what will probably be our main and longest discussion, talking about visionOS 2. So we can just start by talking about that other country news. If you've been outside the US and you've been waiting to buy this thing, that is going to happen really, really soon. So it is coming to the UK, Canada, Germany, France, Australia, Japan, Singapore, and China. China, Japan, and Singapore will come first on June 28th, the end of this month. Then the UK, Canada, Germany, France, and Australia will follow on July 12th. So by July 12th, this thing will be in a total of 9 countries. Now, obviously, all of those countries, except for I think Singapore, have a lower GDP per capita than the US. So the affordability of this thing will be even worse there. And all of those countries, except for China, have a lower population. So this probably will not move the needle hugely in terms of Apple Vision Pro's total sales and market success, but it's a natural step, right? It's a product that was only in the US. It's going to be available internationally. It will be interesting to see what people think of it. And the bigger thing is what we've been saying about Vision Pro since launch, that for many people, buying it is not the point of this product. That's going to sound strange, but I'll justify myself in a second. For many people, the ability to walk into an Apple store and try it out for that 15 to 20-minute demo is the point. Because even if you are literally looking at the price here and going, what the expletive, that's crazy, I'm not spending $3,500 on something like this. You walk into that store, you try that 20-minute demo, and I would guarantee 99 out of 100 people will walk out of that completely blown away. And then 2 years down the line, maybe there's a model that's $2,000. And then maybe 3 or 4 and 5 years down the line, there's a $1,200 model. And at some point, that price to quality equation will start to click into place for people, especially as we see visionOS expand, right? We're going to talk about visionOS 2, but there'll be visionOS 3 and 4 and 5. And as a bunch of apps come to Vision Pro, developers have had this thing for 4 months and we're already seeing some incredible stuff. Imagine what's going to be there after 4 years. That's when people start to buy this. So in many ways, the real news here in the grand significance of history is that in 8 more countries, people can walk into an Apple store and try Vision Pro.
Wonderful discussion. I've been watching the back and forth here from a lot of our members. Thank you so much for your support. And the one here from Craig, I think we should mention Craig's because we've done the transition from Quest to Apple Vision Pro. Craig asking, how does Horizon Worlds blend or interact with Codec avatars? So referring to the very simplistic meta avatars that we're using now. Those are the ones that populate Horizon Worlds. So if you go into those social spaces, you use these weird cartoony avatars. At the other end of the spectrum, there are hyper-realistic avatars. I've spoken to people at Meta who are working on these projects. Future Meta headsets are going to need to authenticate you as a person in the same way Optic ID authenticates you as a user inside of the Apple Vision Pro headset, and that will unlock the other category of avatar that will get you your photorealistic connections. And what I think is, David, that's the end game for Facebook. It doesn't make sense for Meta to do that unless you can take your real identity from Facebook and sort of add that as your real, I'll bring all those people over from that old network that's dying from the early 2000s and shove them into your real faces into VR. But we'll see how that gets. That's their long-term path. They'll get there eventually.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very long term though, because in the beginning, codec avatars are very likely going to be for one-on-one calls because these things are just ridiculously computationally expensive. Notice that in every demo you've seen of this, including that really impressive Lex Friedman interview with Mark Zuckerberg, which you should go and watch, just go to YouTube and search for Lex Friedman Metaverse interview and you'll see it. That is them as codec avatars. They're not in a virtual environment. They're not in Horizon Worlds. They're not even in a basic 3D room. They're in a blank void. And that's because the system is using so much resources just to render the avatars. And to be clear, just the head and shoulders of the avatars that they can't do anything else. So when this comes to standalone headsets, we expect you're going to see codec avatars in a one-to-one calling app, maybe, and this is optimistic, you'll see it in Horizon Workrooms where you can have maybe, say, up to 5 people at once, or even, super optimistically up to 10. But it's going to be a decade or more until you see this in an app like Horizon Worlds where there's actually complicated stuff going on in the background. Maybe even like 15 to 20 years before you see this kind of thing arrive in a standalone headset.
I'm wondering, how do I frame this question for our viewers? How do I frame it for myself? How do I frame it for you, David? Did Meta focus on the wrong thing in getting gaming first. They built the Quest system around gaming. It's the best console. You pushed back on me on that last week, but the Apple Vision Pro focused on codec avatars by a different name, right? Persona, their version of personas, the exact same technology, this technology that people at Meta have stood at industry conferences and said, this is the future of the telephone. They put their technology that they had built on a pedestal with Alexander Graham Bell and the invention of like the telephone 150 years ago, and they just got beaten to market by Apple Vision Pro and personas, not by anything else, right? Meta got there first with gaming. They got there with tens of millions, but was it the wrong technology to get there first with?
Well, no, because Meta isn't doing this because it wants to not deliver codec avatars. It can't on standalone, right? Until say the XR2 Gen 2 can do it, then that means that they only could do that as recently as 6 months ago, right? They started with gaming because gaming works well in VR, even when you have a very low resolution display, even when you have very basic graphics. To deliver telepresence, you need not only really, really great eye tracking and face tracking sensors. You need a ability to capture, which means on Vision Pro, you have these depth sensors on the front. You then need the ability to render those in real time, which means on Vision Pro, you have an M2 chipset, right? There is no way that Meta can ship a headset with the M2 chipset, or sorry, an equivalent to the M2 chipset anytime soon. They would have to, even Qualcomm has only just come around with an equivalent, and they would have to do an external battery architecture. Gaming was a really great original start for VR, and so is fitness. But to get to the next kind of use cases, to get to other use cases like virtual monitors, you need to have extremely high resolution, which means, again, you need to have a chipset that can drive that. You need to have displays that are available, right? One of the reasons that Vision Pro is $3,500, as I say many, many times on this show, is that it uses these displays that Apple cannot get enough of them to make this a mass market product. They can get 500,000 a year, enough for 500,000 headsets. That doesn't allow Meta to move this. As Anakazi's pointing out in our comments, Vision Pro's personas are not at codec avatar quality. They're great. I really think they're great, but they're not. And they're only the head as well. You don't get any torso. The other thing is, it's Apple Vision Pro's spatial personas are the best telepresence technology that exists today. But it doesn't matter because your friend can't afford a Vision Pro, right? How many friends do you have that have a Vision Pro? Not industry colleagues, just friends in your personal life that have an Apple Vision Pro. I would wager it's zero. Well, okay, you have one. There's one. For the average person that is looking into buying a Vision Pro, I would say the answer is going to be zero. And that's the problem here. So gaming makes sense because it works really well with hardware that you can sell for $200 or $500 today. But that doesn't mean that they can't build up to it, right? Like they are going to take a console and make it into a general computing device, whereas Apple is coming from the other approach where until, as we'll talk about soon in visionOS 2, until visionOS 2, gaming was essentially impractical in Vision Pro. And that's something they're only just starting to pull into.
Yeah. Well, the reason I went there on that comparison, and I appreciate you getting into it really deeply there, David, is where do these companies go? Is it possible we've got a headset, an ecosystem of Metas that doesn't care about your face or eye tracking, and they're going to sell boatloads of them at just a couple hundreds of dollars. And here you've got this Apple ecosystem that, like, yeah, it does face and eye tracking. It's got aptic ID, but to your exact point, I can't connect with anybody else with these headsets, right? I have to, at this point, route through PC in order to do it. That's the easiest way to connect with the most number of people. And that's kind of ridiculous. So we're going to see Apple pull things from Meta's idea, pool of ideas, and we're going to see Apple, we're going to see vice versa. And I think that's what some of our subjects up here are going to cover.
Yeah, I think what interestingly you're going to see is that there's going to be a convergence factor here. They're starting at different ends. It makes sense for Apple to start at this end because they have the engineering ability and the chipset availability to do a really high-end headset. They have an audience a customer base that is actually willing to spend $3,500. People weren't willing to spend $1,500 on Meta's headset. Now, admittedly, we talked earlier about how that was because of the implementation, but still, I think uniquely Apple could do a Vision Pro, not just from an engineering perspective, but from an actual market perspective. And what we're going to see, and what we're already starting to see with the software updates we've seen for each headset since launch, is that these headsets are going to come at very opposite ends and start converging into each other. And I think that just like with Android and iOS, I would strongly wager that in 3 years and in 5 years, the Apple Vision hardware and ecosystem and the Meta Quest or Horizon OS hardware and ecosystem are going to look remarkably similar. They're going to, in many ways, copy each other's best features. And as we'll talk about in visionOS 2, we've already seen some of that happening, and we've already seen it happening on Meta's side. But let's just quickly first talk about that interesting news about spatial videos and immersive videos, because this is one of the really interesting use cases of Vision Pro, and we're now starting to see Apple announce that people are going to be able to actually make them, right? So it's first, before we start this topic, important to understand the difference between spatial video and immersive video. So confusing, Ian and I have talked about this many times. It is a confusing proposition in many ways, but once you understand it, it's key to understanding what we are discussing here. So spatial video is just Apple's name for 3D video, right? It's normal rectangular video that exists on a plane, except it's 3D, right? It's stereoscopic. It's a special HEVC format for side-by-side 3D. And so today you can capture that in your iPhone 15 Pro, and you can capture that on your Apple Vision Pro headset directly. But the problem is then that's just like capturing some, family videos or something. What happens if you want to actually make a professional production in spatial video? You want to make a short film, you want to make an advertisement, you want to make a music video that can be watched on a headset in 3D. You're not going to have a production pipeline for that. And in many ways, you're probably not going to want to use an iPhone for that, even though Apple is pushing this whole shot on iPhone thing. Let's be real, the vast majority of real productions use real cameras. So Canon has announced a spatial lens for their EOS R7 camera series, and you can see it here. And that means that it's going to be able to capture spatial video so that people can, capture that with a real camera. That's coming later this year. Then Apple is going to release a software update for Final Cut Pro, adding support for editing spatial videos and adding immersive titles and effects. So Final Cut Pro is going to be able to handle 3D video, and then creators will be able to use that to actually edit real productions of 3D video. So a real camera and a content creation pipeline. Craig in our comments is saying this is just a content creation pipeline to bring more content. Absolutely, that's what it is. And as for what you'll actually view this on, YouTube already supports 3D video, and Vimeo has announced that it is going to support 3D video as well. And it's also going to launch a visionOS app that supports viewing in 3D. I don't think you can actually currently watch YouTube in 3D on Vision Pro because YouTube doesn't have an app. But Vimeo, Apple has kind of gone out there and said, okay, YouTube's not going to support us for now. We'll go to your primary competitor, Vimeo, as a production format. So is there anything you want to talk about before we talk about immersive video, or do you have any thoughts on spatial video to start?
Yeah, no, I think you should get on there. I'll mention Show's comment here, and then we should explain the other type, because I have comments about both. But Show's comment here, while I love my Quest 3, the headset I wish I could afford is the Apple Vision Pro. Games are fine, but I really want something that's both social with apps like InSpace, which allows realistic avatars, and work that allows me to really use my MacBook in VR. I'm encountering that with myself, right? Like visionOS 2 has a lot of little things. David will get into a lot of those soon. We'll cover all that. But like the trim command, you can trim videos now in Apple Vision Pro. That's something that as of last week I could not do, and it makes a dramatic difference to be able to trim a few segments off the ends of a video and then send that along into your queue. It's a major difference, and these things are getting added on in real time. All right, David, why don't you break down an immersive video?
Yeah, so we'll just quickly cover that immersive video news here. So spatial video is regular video, but 3D. Now, Apple immersive video is VR 180. So it's 180 degree immersive video with stereoscopic 3D, high bit rate, and spatial audio. So it's this format for really, really good 180-degree VR. And if you have a Vision Pro, you'll know that the Apple TV content that uses Apple Immersive Video is incredible. It looks so much better than the vast majority of VR 180 you've seen out there. It is VR 180 done right. The problem with it, though, is that every single thing on there is made by Apple. They're using their semi-custom capture and production technology that they developed from their acquisition of Next VR. So if you're a third-party creator, you can't go and make that, right? If you're a film director and you buy a Vision Pro and think, I want to go make this myself, not through Apple, but I just want to use my own production studio and make some immersive video, you cannot do that today. And that's the other thing that's changing. So again, just like they're going to let people produce spatial videos, the problem, of course, is that there's no way to capture immersive video today with those same standards. So Apple has partnered with Blackmagic Design, which is the Australian camera hardware and editing company behind DaVinci Resolve. You may know that software, DaVinci Resolve. So later this year, they will launch a production workflow, Apple and Blackmagic. And so that will consist of a new Blackmagic camera, this beast over here, that will record 8K by 7K per eye at 90 frames per second with 16 stops of dynamic range. There is no word on the price of this thing, but I imagine it is going to be in the six figures, right? This thing's going to cost probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. I might be wrong about that. That is just a guesstimate, but I think I'm probably right. They will also release an update to DaVinci Resolve Studio. Sorry?
Blackmagic does a good job with their competitive pricing, but I mean, historically, those things are hundreds of thousands, but I mean, Blackmagic stuff is usually tens of thousands, I would think.
Sure, yeah. But this is a dual 180-degree camera that's recording 8K by 7K at 90 frames per second. I don't think this thing is going to... okay, so we have someone in the comments, Jack B, saying it's 15K. I didn't see a price announced on this, even though I did kind of look into it. So there you go. I stand corrected if that is the case. We'll have to fact check that. But 15K is a remarkable price for something like this. If that's the case, then that's excellent. So, yeah, the as I was saying before you spoke there, the other update will be to its DaVinci Resolve Studio editing software and Apple's compressor encoding tool. So that editing software will be able to actually edit footage captured by this in 3D 180 degrees. And again, that's about giving a professional production pipeline for making actual short films, documentaries, music videos, and advertisements in this format.
All right, that's not the AI doing that. That's David Heaney's Northern Irish accent. What's your favorite movie film?
What's my favorite film of all time?
Oh wait, he said it normal that time. Film. We heard it twice. Film. It's okay, whatever. I'm gonna move on here. All right, let's talk about these production devices. This is production equipment. These are, Apple is making a case here that professionals may want to go and get these types of devices to capture media for future VR headsets. Meta did this with Red. They did it with Jaunt, I think. They did it with a couple of startups that tried to make 360 cameras, to David's point, that were hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was hysterical. I remember looking I remember being at one conference, and this guy was showing us one of these cameras that was a ridiculous amount, and it got, I think, thrown off of a high-speed moving race car. So here's this massive, expensive camera that's being used in the most absurd ways, getting tossed off a device, and it's hysterical to imagine that much equipment getting tossed that quickly. When it's more affordable like this, you start talking about equipping, I don't know, dozens of productions worldwide who could actually be doing things like the really cool parkour videos. So you could have parkour, rock climbing, really cool. You could put a device like this in really cool places and capture really nice footage. The problem I have with it, David, and I think I see it a little bit in our comments, is what software do you edit these specialized productions with? I know some of them are out there, like Premiere and others already do that, but it's not just the editing. You also need some level of uh, AI adjustment. I don't know what you want to call it, but you don't want to employ a special effects house to go and clean up your footage that might have like a speck come fall on a lens. This is what happened to me with 180-degree videos. A single speck on either of these lenses, on either of those lenses, will destroy the entire stereo effect, the entire picture you're trying to provide. You need customized software solutions to help erase that stuff from your flow. And I don't think that exists in really easy to use ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think with professional productions, they're going to make sure the lens is clean, right? That's just something that you need to have the ability to preview it in real time. We'll have to see more details later this year. I did just verify that claim of 15,000, so that's not actually quite accurate. This is based on a camera that is 15,000 without a lens, so that's a single traditional camera that is $15,000 without a lens, and those lenses cost thousands of dollars. So I expect this thing is probably going to be on the order of $20,000 to $30,000, then plus a lens. You're going to quickly, once you get all those accessories up together, get pretty close to $40,000 or $50,000, I would imagine. But they have specifically not revealed the exact pricing of this thing yet. The point is, it's not going to be the kind of thing you get for a few $100s or a few thousand. This is going to be on the order of $20,000 to $40,000 all in for pricing. This is not for your typical YouTuber. This is for a proper production studio, to make real content. The big question will be about monetization and platforms, right? So you can upload this to YouTube. Sure, you could upload this to YouTube and it would get converted into regular old VR 180. That's not something that you're going to make a real serious financial return on. Even if you're making something that's not through Apple, you may end up selling this to Apple TV, because right now Apple TV is the only service that is actually able to output and stream Apple Immersive Video. It'll be very interesting to see, do other content companies get there? Will there be another platform, right? Will someone come up with a platform that is only for spatial video and immersive video, and then you pay a subscription fee, or perhaps you even do a microtransaction? That has always been the biggest question here, is how do you actually get these things monetized? And that's something that we haven't seen a good answer for yet.
Yeah, so when we start seeing productions from places other than Apple putting new immersive videos on more than just Apple headsets, right? When we go into Horizon Worlds and see the same production that we saw captured over in Apple Immersive Video, and they're both done at incredible qualities. How do you transition? Like, that sounds tempting. I want to get there, but how do you build an ecosystem where, I don't know, people are spending $2.99 an episode and getting another 20 minutes to go experience? Like, we did this before. It happened almost a decade ago now, and it was a huge failure. This is a new generation of much higher quality capture technology, but I don't see it. I don't see the workflows yet. I know that they're out there, but Apple's trying to build it right now, I guess.
I mean, I think that's what they're going for with DaVinci Resolve, right? That's the whole point, is to build up that workflow. I think what's changed in the past decade is the move to subscription. And we've had this debate before, but I think, that's what Apple realized with the Vision Pro. The current Apple immersive videos that are first party are available through the Apple TV Plus subscription. I think that solves this in many ways, right? Because then you have creators getting this guaranteed income. You have the service able to kind of greenlight things without worrying about, is this specific thing going to fail? If something does fail, the bigger hits can keep it propped up. That has been the trend over the past 10 years, this move from buying TV shows to buying a subscription that gives you all these TV shows. And I don't see that being any different for immersive video.
With spatial video, like, it's really cool to just be able to capture with the headset, capture with phones. The problem I had, David, I can hear you typing. The problem that I've had is we're going to get into visionOS 2 now. I'm bothered by the blurriness that Apple just introduced with some of their formats. So like I took a photo with one of the apps on Vision Pro, and it had virtual content. It had the Meta smart glasses over here as a virtual 3D model, and then it had the actual physical Ray-Ban smart glasses sitting right next to each other. And then I could press a button inside of visionOS, and it basically turned them into a spatial photo of some kind with that same technology. So here's something that started as a screen capture of what I'm seeing in VR, and then the depth was added in a fake way afterwards. And it's really hard to think of that as the same fundamental like to the end person. They're not going to know the difference between what that is and what an old captured image was. We use terms like footage to refer to like physical film. All those things are thrown out the window when we talk about these blurry things and how we capture media. But let's move on to visionOS 2 now, David.
Yeah, let's move on to our final topic here. This is a really significant upgrade to Vision Pro. It's not that it does anything fundamentally different in most ways. It's just that it really fills in all of the gaps that were left there in Vision OS 1. It makes some improvements that everyone's been hoping for and wanting. And yeah, it does seem, I've been playing around with it a little bit. I only just got it earlier today, but it really does seem like it makes Vision Pro, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like just a lot more refined and polished than where it was at launch. So we'll just quickly go through the significant features. So I'll talk about the ones that were, announced in the keynote that are user facing. You have system hand gestures. So instead of having to reach your hand up to the top of the headset and press a button every time you want to bring up the app launcher, yes, that is really how Vision Pro works. Currently on Vision OS 1, you have to reach up and press a button to bring up the app launcher. You'll be able to use the same gesture as on MetaQuest, where you just open your palm, your right palm, and pinch. And as you can see there, it brought up the system menu. So that'll be there on Apple Vision Pro. There's also this little kind of quick menu that is attached to your hand when you then face your palm down again. So you'll see like the battery status, the time, your connectivity, and you can pinch and drag on that to quickly change the volume. So that's a really important fundamental change to the UX. You can also, this one's going to sound ridiculous, but you can actually rearrange apps on the home screen now. That's something you couldn't do in Vision OS 1. You were just left with alphabetical. Crazy to think about, that you couldn't rearrange the home screen. Then there is the feature that Ian was just referring to, where regular photos get turned into spatial photos. So they do a machine learning algorithm to analyze and come up with synthetic depth for the image, the same kind that can be used to turn traditional images into portrait images. And then you get those images as 3D. It'll be interesting to see if they can one day do that with 3D videos as well. Mac Virtual Display is getting a major improvement with a wide and ultra wide mode. So you can turn your 13-inch laptop into a giant ultra wide monitor. And that's a different approach from what we were talking about earlier with the Quest apps like Horizon Workrooms, Immersed, and Virtual Desktop, where they're giving you virtual extra monitors. With Apple's approach, they are just taking the existing monitor and stretching it out so there are no actual boundaries. Because when you think about it, why are there still boundaries between monitors in VR and AR? Why would you need that? That's something that's a result of the physical limitations of physical monitors in the real world. And Apple says that together this is equivalent to two 4K monitors. So this is like an 8K by 2K view, really high resolution. There is a new virtual environment, Bora Bora, which a lot of people who have tried Vision OS 2 so far really like. Safari has a new full screen video mode where instead of the full screen video just appearing in that same floating window, it actually gets brought up into this giant immersive enormous cinema screen. Vision Pro will now be an AirPlay target. This is a huge, huge change. This means you can cast from your iPhone to Vision Pro. So if there isn't a Vision Pro app for something, if you just want to cast something that is on your phone, you don't want to bother installing the real app, You just cast your iPhone to your Vision Pro. That's going to be a really major change. There is keyboard breakthrough. So just like what you actually saw earlier on Virtual Desktop, where it tracks the keyboard and then cuts it out in pass-through in VR, when you're in fully immersive mode in Vision Pro, when you have that digital crown dialed all the way into VR, currently you see your hands and your arm all the time. You will now also all the time see your keyboard. Mouse support. This is a huge one. visionOS did not support a mouse. Quest does. So even when you had that physical keyboard connected, you still had to use the eye tracking as a cursor, essentially. You could use a trackpad, but who wants to do that? Mouse support. That's a huge game changer for the spatial computing use case. Guest users. Okay, so one of the biggest problems with Vision Pro with visionOS 1 is that every single time you wanted to show it to someone else, even if this was the same person that you live with, they would have to go through the hand and eye setup all over again, which takes a solid, maybe 2 minutes in total, maybe 1 minute if they're used to it. You will be able to store a guest user for 30 days and it will keep their hand and eye tracking set up. That's great. Travel mode will now work on airplanes. I don't know where that's so right over there. You're right. It will work on, trains. It already works on airplanes. It launched for airplanes. It will work on trains as well. Meta has also said they're looking into trains for their travel mode, and people say it already works. And people say Vision Pro already works on trains, but this will be something where Apple will be officially supporting it. And finally, of the major features that aren't developer features, because we'll talk about them separately soon, live captions. So you'll be able to get captions on people in the real world, not attached to them, but just in a window. And you'll also get captions for any app. Any app, if you're hard of hearing, you'll be able to have captions on. So that is all of the public-facing keynote announced features. And then we'll talk about those for a little bit. And then after, we'll talk about the underlying tech and developer features that are arguably even more interesting.
Yeah, so let's look at this list. I went to the Bora Bora environment, very beautiful. These trees on your left and right that you can really just gawk at and look at with beautiful sound and both night and day. Then the tabletop kit is a pretty huge API. I'm seeing Apple shore up some of the low-hanging fruit that was missed by sort of OS 1. So even though it's called minor, it really isn't. This ends up being a fuller package than what's shipped with, and it's only a few months old ultimately, right? Again, this thing was announced last year, but it only started shipping a couple months ago at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, I think we can talk a little bit now about some of those underlying and developer things. So firstly is enterprise APIs. So Apple has come up with this category of 5 features that only enterprise will be able to use. And the flagship one is main camera access. This has been a hugely requested feature from developers. What they really wanted for is consumer apps, but Apple is only going to grant it to enterprise. So this means that applications will be able to access the pass-through camera feed and do their own computer vision, not just the small few computer vision tasks that Apple allows. But to be clear, this can only be used for apps in a business setting only, and apps using that pass-through camera access can only be distributed as proprietary in-house apps or custom apps made for a specific business using Apple Business Manager, not the App Store. A managed entitlement is required alongside a license file tied to your Apple developer account after you apply for it and successfully get it. So this is one of those things where Apple will let you use this for businesses, and if you try to step out of line and use this to make a consumer app or start trying to distribute this all over the place, or I guess maybe even start putting out viral videos of what you've done, Apple are going to remotely kill your specific developer license for this very quickly.
It's funny. I like the last qualifier there, the viral videos, right? So that's one thing that we'll have to keep an eye on, right? The thing that we've got Don over there looking at Titan's Clinic, one of these games that came over on Quest. It's got thousands of reviews all of a sudden, and then it just dropped on Apple Vision Pro, this really weird product. And we're both looking at it going, why is this getting so many downloads? Why is it like there's some real traffic generation that's happening on places like X and of course on TikTok to begin with. And it's a new era for VR content sort of becoming viral in very unexpected ways. And so your qualifier there about viral content is rather important. We're going into an election year in the United States where policies around headset governance is, that could turn into a subject out of nowhere.
Yeah. So this idea of whether developers get access to the pass-through cameras or not is going to be a huge area of debate in the industry. Right now in Quest, you don't get it, right? So you may be thinking, how is that possible if I'm playing a mixed reality app, some of you? To be clear, developers use pass-through as a background. From the app's perspective, what you see as pass-through is essentially their transparent part, right? So they composite the virtual objects that they want to exist in your space, and then the system compositor puts on the pass-through as a background. The app developer never actually gets to see your house. They never get to see through those cameras on Quest, on Pico, on Vision Pro, except for this enterprise specific exception. They never get to actually see those cameras. And that protects privacy in many ways, right? It means app developers don't get to see your house. They do get a 3D mesh if you approve that as a permission. When it pops up, do you want to give this application your spatial data? They get a 3D mesh of your environment. They do not get cameras. But that protects privacy, but it significantly hampers innovation because there are so many things that developers could do if they could run their own computer vision algorithms that Apple and Meta haven't implemented. We'll talk soon about some tracking features in one of the new ones, but these headsets have a very limited ability to directly interact with what's actually around you, right? In terms of the interesting thing is that you can actually do all this on an iPhone, right? You just have to click allow to giving an app camera access, and it can now run whatever machine learning models it wants and do all of this kind of cool augmented reality stuff. You see these Snapchat filters that are very popular, same thing on Instagram and TikTok. You would probably see a massive explosion in innovation and viral videos, as we were discussing, if it were possible to use these cameras. I think, though, that Apple doing it this way, bringing it to enterprise, is actually a sign that they do not plan to do that anytime soon. The fact that they've gone through all of this effort to come up with this enterprise API system with a managed entitlement license says to me that this is not going to change anytime soon, that this is going to be something developers don't get access to.
I'm pretty sure our viewers are about to invent communism to watch each other on cameras as they discuss the privacy of their cameras and how to keep an eye on each other out there in the comments. So yeah, people are wondering why these devices don't have camera access when camera access is granted on your phone. It is an obvious question. It's one we're going to return to. We reported on it a little bit. I always think back though on this idea that at least when you've got the cameras out or when you've got your phone in your hand, the gesture of holding the device in your hand is a signal to other people that you're recording or doing something with your phone. It's like a social signal to everyone else that there's a device out and recording. You go to a concert, and I joked about it before, but 30, thousands of people all holding their phone up at once is a signal to everyone else. As annoying as it is, it also lets everyone else know you're recording. Apple and Meta have both done various software things to let you know that their headsets are recording, but it's a very different thing than sending that signal to everyone.
Yeah, I guess this is more of a privacy thing for the user themselves, though, right? Because, even if you're holding up a phone, imagine you're at home alone, right? Forget about other people for a second. You open an app on your iPhone, you give it permission to use your camera, and it's now able to see your home, right? There's no way that Apple can verify that is not literally streaming a video stream of your phone out to some server in China, right? Of course, there are ways they can try to figure that out, but if an app really wants to do that, it could. That's just a privacy violation. With a headset, it's not like the equation changes that much. It's just that it is now your first person view at all times instead of just, on a phone, maybe when you lift it up for a little bit and most of the time it's kind of pointing down. But if
Well,
you have
well,
front
well.
camera access on a phone, it sees you and it sees down at the same time. I really understand the arguments both ways here. And I think there are a lot of developers that are very frustrated at their inability to innovate here. And I understand that
Uh,
loud and clear.
uh, yeah, all right. So, and Guy Godin, speaking for those people, yes, glad they're bringing this to enterprise. It's a good first step. I do want to push back on your comments that it's not so different, except it from your first person view. Fundamentally, I would consider that the last space in which private companies have not started recording and analyzing what you're doing at all times, right? Like, to your point, David, right? Like, you're only in view of your phone when you're immobile. You're sitting there looking at your phone, and the camera could be looking at you there. Now these first person cameras are capturing everything else you do, right? Like, they can analyze every action, every behavior, everything you do, and they can make sense of it and then use it as the platform for their next thing, right? They can build apps for all of those things you do. That is why Meta is after this. It's why Apple's after this. And we're describing why they're spending tens of billions of dollars to own what you see and own that perspective. So you're right, David. Like, fundamentally, like, it's just one more thing. It's fundamental. It's like, it's not too different, but it just it requires us to, like, say, what are the laws governing the use of this data? Like, we have to keep going on that question and asking what is different about what 4 hours of recorded first person video versus what 1 hour of that type of video that you're specifically recording what all those people over there, right?
Yeah, I think where this gets very different is when it starts to get in the long term future to outdoor AR glasses instead of indoor headsets. That's when everything goes very, very different. And there is an argument to be made that if you do give developers camera access today on indoor headsets, there may be an expectation that that will then translate to the outdoor AR glasses. And that's something that companies are probably not going to want to do for a very, very long time. Are we ready to talk about some of those enhanced tracking features when it comes to what developers do actually get?
Yep, absolutely. It's the obvious next step once we sort of I am appreciating the comments, the people sort of dealing with the privacy issues. We joke about it from time to time, but it's also a very, very, very serious thing that we will handle very seriously with our reporting when we come to it. But that the flip side of tracking is it gives us enormously useful features. And why don't you run those through?
Yeah, so visionOS 2, this was not announced in the keynote, but it was announced in the developer sessions, which we went through and watched and extracted some of that information for you. You can go to uploadvr.com and see the videos of these features we're talking about in action. We do eventually want to be able to play our article videos in the studio. It's just a matter of getting time to add that as a feature, but you can follow along on uploadvr.com and you'll see all those articles still there at the top. So there are two areas in which Vision Pro has improved, and there's one area in which it has a new feature that no other headset has. So we'll first talk about hand tracking improvements. So a huge criticism in our Vision Pro review was the fact that the headset was clearly very capable of great hand tracking, because when you're in the shared space and moving around a screen, for example, it's really, really responsive to you pinching your fingers together and moving stuff around in 3D. But what game developers got, or third-party developers of any sort, was a low refresh rate, 30 hertz hand skeleton. So that made, and currently makes, because to be clear, visionOS 2 is coming out later this year. There is a developer beta, but right now most people are still on visionOS 1, the stable operating system. So that means that on visionOS 1, games like Super Fruit Ninja and Synth Riders feel sluggish because you don't have these track controllers. You're just relying on hand tracking. And to make that worse, on visionOS 1, it's 30 hertz. It feels high latency. It feels sluggish. It sucks. With visionOS 2, Apple is solving this. So they're making two big improvements to hand tracking. And I've tried this myself already in very limited test time earlier today, and other developers have tried it to confirm that this is real. So firstly, they're providing the hand poses at display refresh rate. So that means most of the time 90 hertz. So that's a tripling of the actual hand tracking update rate. That alone is huge and significant. But there's another improvement they're making that's optional, and that's prediction. And this is used in many VR tracking systems, whether it be for your headset or your controllers or your hands, where it will deliver extrapolated hand poses representing where the hand should be by the time the frame is actually displayed to your eyes. And so that prediction forward in time means that you will get a lower effective latency, right? Because by the time the frame arrives, your hand's moving this way, it delivers to the developer where your hand will be, it feels lower latency. The trade-off there is that you lose some accuracy because sometimes your hand will kind of go like this and you'll move your hand in one direction and then you'll start changing it, but the system will still think you're going off in that direction. So overall, you get this sort of slight jitter in hand tracking that you accept for the lower latency. And so that's why prediction is optional. So the 30 hertz to 90 hertz thing is just every app gets that, hooray. The prediction is optional. And Apple recommends using this in cases where you want to anchor a object to your hand. So if you're picking something up in Job Simulator or any game you want to pick a virtual object up, you want to use prediction with hand tracking. So it feels really locked to your hand instead of your hand lagging behind. Because remember, in Vision Pro, you are actually seeing the pass-through feed. So if you would use the old hand tracking system, when you're moving an object along, you'll see it trail behind your hand, whereas with prediction it's going to seem like it's really well locked to your hand. So that hand tracking improvement is great. The other improvement that has come to Vision Pro is its scene understanding. So firstly, room tracking. The system will now label for the developer your floors and your walls, even if your walls are non-rectangular. So you can see in blue here where they're doing that. Additionally, it will get the ability to detect slanted planes. So today, Vision Pro will already tell developers where flat planes are, so tables and desks and surfaces like that. You can see those in red on the counter, but it will now be able to do slanted planes too. And with that room tracking that I was talking about, where you get the floors and walls, that supports multiple rooms. So when you walk from one room to another, Vision Pro will tell the developer that you've done this and will start providing the room geometry for the new room. And so Apple says that by knowing what each room is and remembering it, the app could do something interesting, like, for example, have a virtual pet that only pops up in your bedroom. And to be clear, developers could always theoretically maybe do this themselves because they always got this 3D mesh of your environment, just like they got on Quest. But to build useful apps that take advantage of your real room, they need to understand what's within that 3D mesh. And that's what these features are all about. It's about telling developers, this is where the floor is, this is where the table is, this is where all the walls are, this is what room the user is in, and then the developer can use that semantic information to build interesting mixed reality apps. It's something similar to what we've seen on Quest recently, where it's able to segment out where your TV is and where your couch is and your table. And it just means that we're going to get apps that are much more responsive to your environment, right? So you open a tabletop game like Demio and it's just instantly locked to the largest flat surface, i.e. your giant table in your room. All of that more room aware.
I want a Jeff room. I want a room where when you walk in it, Jeff just pops out, like he explodes out of a window, and just you don't expect it. You walk in that room and boom, he's programmed to pop into the room. I saw ALVR, the dev behind ALVR. This is the open source streaming solution for getting your PC VR or your PC into any headset, but even on Apple Vision Pro. I saw the dev immediately started using this prediction algorithm to start tuning how the Apple Vision Pro passes along that hand data over to Steam VR. And I went in there and it is pretty cool. When you get the Wi-Fi just right, it feels a lot more dialed in. But it's not there yet. It's not everything I need it to be for Half-Life Alyx, for all those great Beat Saber, all those great games where you need really low latency, you need haptics to match it, and it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not there yet, as you say, but it is a really impressive update, right? I'd also tried this briefly before we came on the show because I wanted to try it out before I talked about it. And yeah, this is a game changer. This new 90 hertz hand tracking with prediction, it means that you can now do direct interaction in a rapid context on Vision Pro that doesn't suck. That's a long-winded way of saying gaming no longer sucks on this thing, right? Once we see more and more developers start to incorporate this prediction, which will probably happen once visionOS 2 launches, you now get hand tracking that is good enough for fast action. Again, in my Vision Pro review, I pointed out how without these controllers, Apple is putting so much burden onto the hand tracking, and it just did not deliver for developers. It's astounding that they launched hand tracking in this state for Vision Pro. For visionOS 2 to solve it is great to see. It at least shows that Apple knows this is a problem. But yeah, you can now build proper games on this thing, right? Again, for some people, me saying that without there being a controller with thumbsticks is going to be a bit controversial. But from the same sense that I can now imagine Apple having something like Super Fruit Ninja or having an equivalent to Beat Saber. For some people, that's the likes of Synth Riders, where you're not moving your hands along going, wow, this is so laggy and terrible. It's so much of Vision Pro's strength so far has been on the really passive stuff, sitting down and having a virtual monitor, sitting there and having a gigantic 4K 3D cinema screen. This now gives it the hand tracking to start to do more interactive things. I'm curious when we'll see a fitness app arrive for Vision Pro. The display persistence that gives you that motion blur means that might not be ideal, but I do think with this update and also Health Kit coming, so it can now store your burned calories and things like that to Apple Health. That's also coming in visionOS 2. We may finally start to see this thing used for fitness.
Yeah, so you can imagine a path here where we get 2.0 sort of honed over the next couple months, right, from beta into a full release. And then we've got more features after that we all want. And we kind of want to get there. And the one that I'm seeing here, Apple still needs some kind of haptics for hands. Yeah, we haven't seen any effort to close the haptic gap here. We don't see how Apple Watch is going to pair with Vision Pro. We don't see even the Apple Pencil Pro that has some new features inside of it. We don't see how that syncs up with Apple Vision Pro. That is the next low-hanging fruit. That's the next piece that I am desperate to see. It's tough, David, to kind of like feel the hand tracking get that much better, but then feel the haptics on a pair of Joy-Cons in each hand mismatched by like a second, right? Like you can feel the difference. You can feel it almost there. This everything coming together, and it's not there, and they could with just a little bit more development.
Yeah, I think that is the huge open question for Vision OS 3 next year, right? I don't see this magically happening in the Vision OS 2 cycle, but and I also never see Apple coming out with anything that looks like a touch controller. But will they eventually support that from third-party developers? Will they eventually say, if you want to build a gaming controller for Vision Pro, you can? We've seen Apple's stance on games dramatically shift in the past few years across their other platforms, right? They just announced for iOS 18 a game mode that when you're in a game, it brings up the clock speeds, it turns off the background processes, it delivers lower latency audio and such, and also samples the Bluetooth controllers higher. We saw even before that, the years before, they put in a huge amount of effort into iOS and tvOS and iPadOS to support gamepads. And recently we've seen that game porting toolkit for Mac and now for other areas of the Apple ecosystem get another version. So Apple is clearly very serious about gaming these days. It's just, will that eventually come for Vision Pro? No time soon. I still think Apple wants to give developers more than enough time to build out great interactive experiences and games with what they have today. Again, we have to keep stressing this. We're only 4 months into this thing, right? Like, yep. We're still at the very, very beginning. I think they want to see what is a year or two of just hand tracking and eye tracking look like? What can developers do with those constraints? And then eventually they may start to say, okay, now let's add on some optional peripherals from third parties and see where that goes.
So, for example, one of the features I noticed that was in Vision Pro, I honestly don't remember checking to see if it was there in Vision OS 1, but I think it was there in Vision OS 2. but I'm seeing it in our comments. David gives me the same exasperated, like, this is bull crap. It's not a good experience on the Joy-Cons, but the Joy-Con analog sticks control all the menus on visionOS too. So you could be on the home screen, have a wristband to hold the Joy-Cons, keep them there dangling there just like you would the controllers on a Quest. Pick one up and then hit left, right, and just go through all your apps that way. Or if you're in like a contextual app that has up and down scrolling, it also does up and down scrolling with those analog sticks. Was a wonderful, delightful thing to discover is suddenly there, and it just gives me heart to prove all of you wrong the way I proved David wrong about the PSVR 2 a couple weeks ago.
Well, yeah, to be clear, that's not something that's Joy-Con specific. That's for any gamepad. That is just bringing the same kind of support for controlling the system with a gamepad that we've seen on other Apple services. That is just using the standard input technology. So that is designed around PlayStation and Xbox controllers. This is something that Apple does support in Vision Pro. They have since the start. They've talked about how they want to make it easy for iPad game developers that support gamepads to bring those on Vision Pro, so you can play 2D games on a giant virtual screen in Vision Pro, right? That is something with a gamepad you hold in two hands. No one is questioning that Apple wants to support that in Vision Pro. The question is about whether those gamepads get split in half like a touch controller. And that's something, as I will point out over and over again, that Apple has not only not supporting, not only did Bloomberg's Mark Gurman report Apple has no plans to support in the foreseeable future, but Apple actually insulted when announcing Vision Pro. They called them clumsy hardware controllers, referencing the Touch Pro. They were saying, our eye tracking system is so great that you're never going to need clumsy hardware controllers.
I think they're playing fun. Did you laugh at all when all of the Apple execs jumped out of a plane, but they, it was clearly faked? Like, did you see any kind of, was that a dig at Google? Did you receive that as the dig at Google?
I don't think that was a dig at Google. Why would it be? I think they were just having fun there. I laughed at seeing Rockwell in his Vision Pro. Mike Rockwell, if you're not aware, being the leader of Apple's kind of AR VR division. That was very funny that everyone else was in their, standard goggles and he was in his Vision Pro, and they looked back and said, you okay there, Mike? And he turns around with the eyesight. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, I love that. No, I was thinking of the debut of Google Glass, right? Do you remember the skydiving into the center for the debut of Google Glass?
I mean, I think it's a long time ago. I think it's a stretch. I don't think Apple orientates its events around that, though. You could be right. Maybe that was the original idea for something like that.
Well, the reason I love it is because it feels like Apple is playing a long game here, and it feels like there's like, we get this picture of internal strife, internal division. Like, we hear these reports that leak out of these. It's almost the sense that these executives hate each other, or they've got differing visions for the future of personal computing, and those things might be true. At the same time, this video gives the impression that they're actually all kind of like working as a team here and coming up with their, Apple's vision for the future of personal computing. And the guy flying the plane there, David, is the guy that I spoke to personally, who has the rig at home to enjoy VR back at home, right?
Now, yeah, was it Phil Schiller flying the plane? I can't remember, but I believe you.
Tell me if I'm wrong. If it wasn't Phil Schiller in front of the plane, no, I'm asking for our audience to correct us if we're wrong. But I think it's Phil Schiller flying the plane, and that is a person who personally spends large numbers, many hours in simulations in their personal computer.
Sure, but you can do that with Vision Pro today. That doesn't need a motion controller. You can right now get your Vision Pro, launch ALVR, connect to Steam VR, sit in your flight sim rig or your racing sim rig and play it. That is actually a great example of what Vision Pro can do through third-party apps, to be clear. But
yeah, so it was Phil. I'm confirmed that it was Phil flying the plane. It was, all right, everyone's remembering.
I believe you.
All right, no, but all right, so Robert Scoble is filmed in his Google Glass, and it is referenced for a decade and a half as this joke of the landscape. Like, Google Glass is a joke that there are legitimately arguments to be made. Glass holes is still a term that we use today. It is still making headlines today. And here's a bunch of Apple execs jumping out of an airplane. They didn't actually jump out of an airplane, right?
Yeah.
That's something Google actually did, right? They actually had people jump out of an airplane to show how Google, like this product wasn't, it failed. Like, let's not forget that Google Glass massively failed after being hyped by all of these people. And here's the entire executive team at Apple saying, we're still behind this idea.
I think there's so much focus on Google Glass still. It was so long ago. It looked awfully ugly. It looked terrible. The biggest problem with Google Glass, it was so effing ugly. It had this one-sided, like it looked like a Borg implant or something. It just was one of the worst aesthetic products that has ever been in the wearable space, right? Like compared to something like the Meta Ray-Bans, I think what the Ray-Ban Meta glasses have actually proved is just how far we are from Google Glass, how many years have passed and how fundamentally the culture has changed. I don't want to get bogged down to this too much because we've talked about this in the past. We don't have a long time left in the show. We want to get to our final topic of object tracking soon, but this is the TikTok era. This is the Instagram era. We're on a different universe than where we were when Google Glass launched, is all I want to say.
Yeah, I think since you sort of pitched it as the last subject here, and I'm seeing in our comments people already expecting object tracking, right? They want object tracking. They want to understand how it works because I think there's going to be some misunderstanding there on exactly what sort of robustness to expect out of object tracking. But it is a huge deal to have on the Apple Vision Pro now. I want to mention, like, are we going to go to printing after this, David? Because I think we should end on this.
We'll finish up with printing.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think there's not going to be a lot to talk about there. I don't imagine. Maybe you've got a printing tangent plan, but I didn't think you did. So we had KSP in our comments correctly predicting what our next topic was going to be, saying there is a new object tracking API in visionOS 2. And you're absolutely right, KSP. There is a new object tracking API. So this is the first time in a pass-through headset, the ability to track 3D objects. This is something that is not available at all on Quest or Pico or Vive. This is a completely novel capability. There's a massive caveat though here. This is not tracking an arbitrary 3D object. This isn't even tracking a 3D object provided at runtime. How this works is that developers, before they compile their app, have to provide a 3D model representing the object they want to track. And Apple's Create ML tool, which is part of the developer tools on Mac, will create a neural network. It will train a small neural network for each object, which will then be baked into the app at compile time. So developers have to pre-specify the 3D model for the object that they want to be tracked. But once they do that, once they then compile that app out, that 3D object is tracked in the real world. So you get a bounding box with the position, the orientation, the size of that 3D object. And as Lil Scampy in our comments point out, this could still be very useful. This is still a pretty big game changer, especially for businesses, especially for like custom apps in education, for example, because what you can do, there are so many things you can do here. I don't think the update rate for this is very high, though, to be clear, right? If you start moving this around, it's not like, 60 hertz. So a comment from Guy Godin here asking they could track controllers. I don't think that's how this works. I think this is like 5 hertz or 3 hertz or something like that. So that's 3 or 5 times a second you get the update.
That's 3 times. That's infinite times more than the Joy-Cons are being tracked right now.
Yeah, we haven't seen what this looks like for small objects, right? If you look at the example objects here, they're all quite large, they're all quite distinct. I don't think this is designed for, moving objects that are occluded within your hand at different angles. This is designed for a relatively large object that the headset has a clear view of at all times. But what you can do with that is still incredible, right? Because the globe example is the one Apple gave in their developer talk, where you can then, for an education example, have objects orbiting the globe. You can put like the moon in and show its distance and talk about it. You can even do something a lot cooler, which is you can then put a 3D object in the position of where the globe is and do something like opening up the globe and showing the layers of the Earth, the mantle, the core. That's just one example. There are many potential things you can imagine doing here for these specific use cases. For common objects, if anyone can think in the comments, what's an example of an object that everyone has or most people have? And I don't mean a generic type of object. I mean, it has to actually be the same dimensions and appearance that you think everyone might have that could be used. I guess an iPhone would be an example, a switched off iPhone, because if you had different contents on the screen, it might start to no longer track because it's looking for the visual appearance of the object. A switched off iPhone could work. There are probably that generic plastic chair that a lot of people have, I guess you could then track. You could also imagine developers coming out with like specific accessories in the very long term for their apps that you put down to interact with. Vision Pro can already do 2D image tracking already, to be clear. So you could already do like a game board for Demio or something, but this is 3D and that's pretty cool.
I mean, Gigo and saying, imagine a toilet for a horror game. I do like the idea that like you've got gremlins flowing out of the toilet and you have to shoot them with your gun, right? Like you have to like get them back out the door there. Yeah, I love this. And I'm thinking about this controller idea, David. Like, is that the path that we have ahead of us where where you've got the tracking following your hands, and then the predict algorithms are like, if you can assume that is location 0 for the controllers, can you also have the controller models follow exactly where the hands are and just adjust them forward based on the prediction algorithm? Like just use that for showing their location?
If you had 60 hertz update tracking, then sure, that does change something for when the hands can't be seen. But right now, like you're talking about having 90 hertz hand tracking, adding a like 1 or 5 hertz object tracking is not going to change anything. And again, from the way they presented this, it does not sound like it's designed for moving objects, never mind stuff that's in your hands. This is designed for this.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm imagining the Steam Link app, right? The Steam Link app has 3D models for every kind of controller inside of it, right? They've got to represent every type of 3D controller inside of Steam VR. They could hypothetically do the same thing for an Apple Vision Pro, right? And
I think for a gamepad, it's a good idea. Again, you're always of this idea of like Joy-Cons. What about just a good old Xbox or PlayStation controller? That's something you could track, right? As long as you have the 3D model of each color variant of an Xbox or PlayStation controller, you then could do something, for example, of being in full VR and showing where the controller is, and then point it out to the user. Maybe you could even either render it or show a pass-through cutout of where it is. That would be a very interesting application if you need to switch to a gamepad at any time. But I think like the majority of what this is for is going to be for businesses. Little Scampy asking might be useful for IKEA. That's an interesting idea. Imagine you had the 3D models for the parts of an IKEA chair that you had to build or something. And so then they could track where those parts are and label them, showing this is the part that goes over there and this is the part that goes over there. You could even imagine, depending on how much storage each of these 3D model neural networks take, you could even imagine like having a separate 3D model for each stage of construction for the chair. So you then track it at each point and they can actually show you like a silhouette of where these things are going. I'm really interested in seeing what developers do with this, because many times when a new capability comes out, and this is a new capability, when we had hand tracking, when pass-through came out as an ability for developers on Quest, when there are 3D meshes that we're only seeing developers start to use, right? We're only just starting to see developers use the room mesh. When these new capabilities come out, there are always things that innovative and clever developers come up with that you or I would never even have thought of, and that's what I'm really interested in seeing.
All right, yeah. So I'm imagining this as what you need for kind of like an immersive museum. Is this if you wanted to if you wanted to build your own museum to whatever out in the desert of some state out in the West, right? Like you want to build some museum to something. If you've got 5 headsets and each of them can track all, if you've set up 15, 30 artifacts throughout this museum, you could have those. You could have a person walk around those artifacts and then see all sorts of effects tethered to that object in the room. You could. Is this? Is that? Could you literally do that? Could you build a museum up from this technology? And is that the type of market that Apple is ultimately shipping these headsets to?
You absolutely could. That's a great example of what you could use this for. Education in museums where you go around these physical objects and you see them augmented, you see them labeled, you see the possibilities for museums are pretty much endless here, right? You could see, like, you walk past the traditional example of a dinosaur and you see the skeleton actually get filled in with what the dinosaur would really look like, and then you could see like something else appear beside it. You could then see what the children of it would look like walking along beside it. There are so many potential possibilities here. It's just you could see like old pottery, you could see fill out to what it would actually have looked like back then. This is something I imagine museums will definitely be exploring. Obviously, with the current Vision Pro form factor, where it's this heavy, expensive thing that has this external battery, it's not as practical. But you can imagine a few years down the line, a Vision Air comes out that's $1,500 and doesn't have an external battery, and this is something you can just start putting on people's heads as they walk into the museum.
I wonder what the limits are of size with this sort of object tracking too, right? Could you track a building if you wanted to have somebody on the top floor of the Empire State Building and then see the city as it stood in the 1900s? Could you do that with the same sort of object tracking?
That's a great question. We haven't seen, the documentation doesn't mention any limitations like that. I may need to look into it in more depth, and maybe there is something in one of the annexes, but we really need to see what developers start to do. James O'Loughlin in our comments is pointing out that museums already do this on mobile with ARKit. So this is all happening through ARKit for Vision Pro, but ARKit for mobile has capabilities that don't exist on Vision Pro. And that this is an example of something that's coming into Vision Pro, and they already seem to do this. So obviously, though, it completely sucks to walk around and see all of this immersive content through a little rectangle in your hand rather than actually putting on a headset and just seeing it in front of you in 3D.
All right. Well, we're ready to talk about printing. I'm going to try not to go off on my tangent here, but I was tickled here by the ability to print from virtual reality. That is one of the things you can do with visionOS 2. I just sort of realized, I wonder if you can do it. And sure enough, I went into the menu system and there's the print button down there. You can print to it just like you can AirPrint from an iPhone or an iPad or Mac. It's there in the menu system as well. It's really, I got giddy writing this. It was funny to me. It's silly that it took this long, David. I think it's fundamentally silly that it took this long to have printing from a VR headset be something you could do. Like, why would you want to do it? Also, why wouldn't you have this ability to be there to begin with? Are both valid questions.
Yeah, I think those are both valid questions. We're only just starting to see these headsets, these standalone headsets that aren't just peripherals for your existing PC, become their own computing platforms, right? Quest only has rudimentary software capabilities for being a general computing platform. They're adding more things over time, like they added copy and paste, and then they added, a file system, and they added like their own, PDF reader, all of these little things that you take for granted on even iOS and Android on your phone that make them computing devices. Because remember, for most people, like around the world, their phone is their computer. They don't have another computer. That is the computing device. So those operating systems have these basic computing functionalities. visionOS is arguably the first spatial / AR VR operating system that is pitched and actually has the capabilities to be a general computing platform. And you're right, they're going to be all of these tiny little things that you want to do. A great example that isn't possible on visionOS is screenshotting a 2D app, right? The one example right now is you are taking a screenshot here as a first person view in Vision Pro. And that's why, and if anyone's wondering, this text here is blurry because this is using foveated rendering. So Ian is looking here, and that's why this is all sharp. And then the further you go away,
Stop tracking my
lower and
eyes.
lower resolution. Sorry?
God. You're tracking my eyes. It's terrifying me. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Yeah, technically, any screenshot in Vision Pro reveals what you're looking at when you take that screenshot. I think the ability to take a first-person screenshot without foveated rendering would be great, right? Like, just I think some people would accept a couple of dropped frames or like, a quarter of a second of lag if it gives you a high-quality screenshot. I think some people would accept that. It may not even require that. You may be able to just ramp the GPU and CPU up to max for literally 100 milliseconds to take a nice screenshot. But yeah, the other problem is you can't take 2D screenshots. I always notice, sadly, it's Bradley, for example, who might be in our comments. They quite famously got rid of their monitor and they only use their Vision Pro as a monitor. And when they're in visionOS, you notice that sometimes they're doing something they would often do is post a screenshot of some interesting VR AR tidbit on X, except now because it's on Vision Pro, you have the same problem where 75% of the image is blurry and your head is slightly rotated because a lot of people don't realize this, but when you think your head is actually flat, often it's actually slightly tilted. Everyone has this kind of slight tilt to their head that's just based on their own musculoskeletal structure, how you like to be comfortably. So you get this tilt, you get this loss of quality. I want the ability to screenshot a window. I want to be able to, this window behind where you have our article open in Safari, I want to be able to say, screenshot that. You can't do it on Quest either, to be clear, but that's something. There are lots of other little computing things.
Chrome Colossus here. Sculptor VR lets you export 3D sculpts from PS4, PS5 to print. Chrome Colossus, thank you for the call out there. I will point out that the creator of Sculptor VR went to work at Apple. So I love that. I love that our commenter brought up that, and I get to mention that. Yeah, I'm very desperate to see what comes of that. Right? We are, it's actually funny. The 3D printing space, if we go to the 3D printing tangent that you let me go on, it's owned by one company. There's like one company that went and swiped up most of the 3D printing ecosystem, and there is no, like, it's a pain in the butt, right? You have to go spend thousands of dollars and have a tweaking, like a system that you have to tweak all the time in order to have all this material feed through the system. At the end of this, David, like, I would love to see a really great 3D printer, right? We've all been waiting for it. I know they're in our audience, these people who have done exactly what I just described. If you're a hobbyist PC maker, right, the next thing you go build is a 3D printer. That's the thing you build after you build your computer. I get it, right? But this is a step along that path, right? So going back to the beginning of our story, David, right? Will we have Meta provide equivalent functionality to AirPrint across all Horizon OS devices in a reasonable span of time? Or will that get mired in just will there be some Horizon OS devices that will be able to print, or will all devices be able to print?
I think it's quite clear that they're going for unified software strategy, right? So once Horizon OS gets that ability, it goes to all of the headsets. The question is how much of a priority it is. A lot of people don't own a printer these days. It's it's a dying device in the sense of how many people ever even need one. It's in the modern world, all of the services and government institutions and businesses that we interact with are all going in the opposite direction, going more towards physical paper to being as digital as possible. So in a way, it is kind of funny to see that this device that is designed around not only turning what you would use paperwork for into software, but turning the literal screens, even the screens that paper became, are now turning into software that you would then go full circle and get the ability to print. But I understand there are always niche circumstances in which you do want to print. And I imagine it's not high priority for Meta, but it'll probably happen eventually, right? 5 years time, it'll happen for sure. Will it happen in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? It just depends on how they prioritize this as a computing platform.
Craig here. Apple brought the screenshot feature to iOS in 2007 and Android got it in 2011. I think that's an interesting one. And also Guy mentioning how janky AirPrint is as a feature. I have had a lot of trouble getting my print to come out just right. But
I think the other great example is that, like, the iPhone launch without copy and paste, right? Like these things that are so many of the features that you consider fundamental today on your phone were not there for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. There are many, many aspects of our current modern operating systems that didn't exist. With Meta, they're going from almost scratch. They're going from the Android open source project, which was not ever designed to be used in VR or AR, right? People always say, oh, Meta is just Android based. Like Meta use AOSP as their core, but they have put so much on top of AOSP to get to the current MetaQuest system software / Horizon OS that they're rebranding it to, that they have essentially built an operating system, right? Meta have all the kernel and core stuff, sure, is being done by Android, the open source product, but to actually build a full on AR VR system and headset, you have to add so much that you've built. I would guarantee you there's much, much, much more meta code running on a Quest than there is actually AOSP code when it gets to the end. With Apple, they have the ability to bring over everything they had in iPad OS already and start to sort of bring that in. Like this is the same interface that you get on iPad OS, slightly refined, right? Like that is essentially what this is. With Meta, they're having to go from mostly scratch. It'll just be a matter of time. The thing is, what we do see very clearly is that Meta's velocity of software is clearly much faster, right? visionOS is cool. It brings visionOS 2 brings some new things, but as you said earlier, Quest is now on V66. Every month you get features coming in. Meta is rapidly moving towards Vision Pro. Vision Pro is slowly, from a hardware and software perspective, going to creep towards MetaQuest position in the market. Well, when this industry will get really interesting and fiercely competitive is when they meet in the middle later in the decade.
So I'm loving the comments. I think we hit a sore spot, or this is actually important to people more than we expected, right? I did this story with glee because it was funny to imagine printing from my VR headset, but ultimately, like, it matters. There's people saying they can't live without their printer, and other people who haven't had one for 2 decades, right? Like that's the truth of the matter, right? You get them for, like, this opens up some really cool new avenues, right? You can imagine we've already got them in existence, portable printers where you can print out from your phone really easily anywhere. It's fun to imagine old devices reborn for a new era, and also printing is how you make a PDF on Apple devices as well. And I think that's also true on Windows as well. So if you want to make a portable document, you go to the printer to do it. And that's pretty true of both VR and outside.
Yeah, I do think we are aging ourselves a bit, though. Like a lot of Gen Z will never own a printer. They not only don't own one, they will at no point in their life ever own a printer. If they do need to print something, they'll go to the library, or while they're at university, they'll go to university. And there's the old joke of you go to your friend with the printer and say, "Oh yeah, aren't we such great pals? Can I come over and borrow your printer for 5 minutes?" The one time a year you need to use one.
It's the truck of you got to get your friend's truck to move from one location to another. That's what the printer is of this generation. All right, well, that is a wonderful aging. Like, I feel so old now. Yeah, thank you so much to our audience. I know you guys, many of you feel old too. It's amazing to see technology reborn in various ways. That is the theme of this story, of this week's episode. Is I think Apple's visionOS 2 laid a lot of groundwork for them to emulate a lot of classic technology in various ways, between the object tracking and then, of course, all these little things that we needed all along. We've got a showcase coming up at the end of the month here with Beck Gibson and I going through the entries. A lot of really cool things coming from mixed reality. We should be coming up on the 26th, I think, for our showcase, but we'll have an article up on UploadVR.com very soon with all those details. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. It's been an amazing conversation with you, David. Thank you for the incredible work breaking down all of the visionOS 2 updates for our audience. I know everyone out there has been reading your updates with great interest, and you've been breaking it down like nobody else can. So thank you for that. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. We'll see you back on Thursday with the Gamescast. We'll see you next week with VR Download. We'll see you later.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again. Please take a look at uploadvr.com to see our visionOS 2 coverage, where you can see videos and more details about what we're talking about today. And thanks for the comments. Remember to comment below in the lower comment section if there's anything you forgot to say, or if you're watching this after and you didn't catch us live. We do endeavor to read them all, even though we don't always have time to reply to everything. Thanks so much, everyone.